The desert wind, a relentless artist, sculpted the dunes into ever-shifting monuments of ochre and rust, painting streaks across the bruised pre-dawn sky. It was a silence both vast and profound, broken only by the distant hum of power lines and the almost imperceptible whisper of fine sand against glass. Inside the observation dome, nestled precariously atop a forgotten mesa somewhere deep in the Arizona Badlands, Dr. Eris Thorne felt that silence like a physical weight, pressing down on the stale air, on the stacks of ancient texts, and on the humming machinery of his customized telescope. His breath plumed faintly in the cool air, a stark contrast to the burning intensity in his eyes. Eris was a man caught between worlds. His tweed jacket, frayed at the elbows, spoke of an academic life, while the calluses on his hands hinted at more rugged pursuits, perhaps digging through sun-baked earth or wrestling with recalcitrant equipment. He nursed a chipped coffee mug, the scent of bitter, lukewarm brew, doing little to cut through the faint metallic tang that always seemed to cling to the dome's air, a smell he'd long since stopped trying to identify. For years he had chased anomalies, both celestial and terrestrial, driven by a gnawing sense that the conventional narratives were, at best, incomplete. At worst, they were deliberate deceptions. Tonight was no different. He leaned back in his worn office chair, the springs groaning in protest, and gazed at the main screen. A mosaic of algorithms and astronomical data scrolled across it, each number a whisper in a forgotten language, each graph a fragment of a cosmic symphony. The constellations, usually so comforting in their predictable dance, felt ominous, heavy with secrets he couldn't quite grasp. Above him, the immense primary mirror of the telescope, a silver eye to the heavens, shifted almost imperceptibly, tracking a faint, distant anomaly. A celestial body that defied all classification, a rogue star or perhaps something else entirely. Its light signature was peculiar, its trajectory even more so, suggesting an orbit that bucked the cosmic order, an audacious path that hinted at intelligent, deliberate navigation. He adjusted the focal length with a practiced hand, his fingers dancing across the greasy keyboard. The anomaly, christened the Wanderer by Eris, shimmered with an unusual, almost artificial luminescence. It wasn't just reflecting light, it seemed to generate it, a subtle pulse that sent faint tremors through his sensitive instruments. Mainstream astronomy had either dismissed it as a glitch or categorized it as a distant, dying brown dwarf, too insignificant to warrant further study. But Eris knew better. His gut, honed by years of sniffing out overlooked details, screamed at him that this was no ordinary cosmic dust-up. This was a signal, a breadcrumb trail leading to something monumental. A sudden, sharp pain flared behind his left eye, a familiar, unwelcome guest. It wasn't a headache in the usual sense, more like a pressure, a memory trying to claw its way to the surface of his consciousness, fragmented and elusive. He squeezed his eyes shut, pressing the heels of his palms against his temples. It was the same feeling he'd had just before his research paper on anomalous energy signatures near ancient Sumerian sites was vehemently rejected, not just by one, but by every reputable journal he'd submitted it to. The dismissal had been too uniform, too absolute, almost as if coordinated. He remembered the chill of the air-conditioned lecture hall at Harvard, the dismissive sneer of Professor Alistair Finch, his former mentor, as Finch had publicly ridiculed Eris's fanciful theories and pseudo-scientific ramblings. Finch, a man whose career was built on maintaining the established order, had looked at Eris with an expression of mingled pity and contempt. It wasn't just a professional setback. It was a public shaming, a quiet academic execution. The memory was a bitter taste in his mouth, a raw wound that still festered beneath the surface of his carefully constructed composure. It had driven him from the hallowed halls of academia to this desolate outpost, a sanctuary for forgotten theories and inconvenient truths. The image of Finch's sneer, momentarily vivid, vanished, replaced by a swirling vortex of indistinct shapes and colors behind his eyelids. Was it a hallucination brought on by fatigue or something more? He opened his eyes, heart thumping an erratic rhythm against his ribs. The Wanderer still pulsed on the screen, its light seeming to intensify, almost daring him to look closer, to unravel its secrets. He felt a profound, unsettling certainty that nothing in his life, nothing in the carefully constructed reality he had always inhabited, would ever be the same again. This silent, distant object was not just a cosmic anomaly, it was a harbinger, a key, and perhaps a direct challenge to everything humanity thought it knew about itself and its place in the universe. The stakes, he realized with a cold shudder, were far higher than he had ever dared to imagine. If this beginning has already made you rethink what you knew, imagine what's coming next. So go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel, because here every video reveals something few have the courage to show. The digital readouts on Aris's console flickered, showing a slight, almost imperceptible increase in the Wanderer's apparent luminosity. He leaned forward, his elbows digging into the cold metal desk, his gaze fixed intently on the data. The slight metallic tang in the air seemed to grow stronger, a phantom scent that hinted at ancient machinery, or perhaps a more primordial energy. He ran a hand through his perpetually disheveled brown hair, a gesture of deep concentration that always preceded a breakthrough or a complete dead end. The solitude of the dome, usually a comfort, now felt like an echo chamber, amplifying his every anxious thought. His research had taken him down countless rabbit holes, from obscure Sumerian tablets to the cryptic petroglyphs etched into the canyon walls just miles from his current location. He'd spent years poring over crumbling scrolls in university archives, debating with fringe theorists in dimly lit online forums, and sifting through government declassified documents that seemed to redact every truly interesting detail. He'd always believed in the interconnectedness of things, the idea that seemingly disparate anomalies were merely threads of the same grand, concealed tapestry. And the Wanderer was the largest, most vibrant thread he'd ever encountered. He activated a spectral analysis program, watching as the faint, pulsing light of the celestial body was broken down into its constituent wavelengths. The results were perplexing. There were clear signatures of elements far heavier than what should be found in such abundance in a typical stellar object. Exotic isotopes, their half-lives impossibly long, suggesting either incredibly unique formation conditions or, more provocatively, artificial creation. It was like finding a fully functional smartphone in the ruins of ancient Babylon. It simply didn't fit. Aris felt a familiar thrill, a mixture of exhilaration and dread, course through him. This wasn't just an anomaly, it was an anomaly screaming for explanation. He cross-referenced the spectral data with his extensive database of historical observations, ancient star charts, and mythological texts. He'd compiled this database himself over decades, a monumental undertaking that spanned civilizations and eons, often ridiculed by his peers as Thorn's folly. Yet within its labyrinthine structure, he believed lay the keys to unlocking humanity's suppressed past. The computer hummed, its fans working overtime as it processed the gargantuan dataset. Outside, the first faint hint of dawn began to bleed across the eastern horizon, painting the sky in hues of soft violet and pale rose. The desert was slowly waking, its nocturnal creatures retreating, its diurnal inhabitants stirring. But for Aris, time had ceased to exist. He was lost in the vast expanse of data, a digital explorer charting unknown territories. A notification flashed on the secondary screen. Match found, probability, low, source, Sumerian cuneiform, tablet K4005. Aris's breath hitched. K4005. He knew that tablet. It was one of the most enigmatic pieces in the British Museum's collection, detailing the arrival of the sky gods and describing a wandering star that appeared periodically in the heavens, bringing both knowledge and upheaval. It spoke of a celestial body of immense power associated with the Anunnaki, the ancient deities of the Sumerians. Mainstream archaeologists dismissed these passages as poetic metaphor or astrological mumbo-jumbo. But Aris had always seen something more literal in the intricate carvings. He pulled up a digital rendering of K4005, zooming in on the specific pictogram identified by his software. It was a crude, stylized depiction of a winged disk, strikingly similar to the modern symbol for a star or planet, but with subtle variations. And next to it, a series of wedges and lines, a cuneiform phrase that, when translated, read, "The bright wanderer, harbinger of the great return." His heart pounded. The pressure behind his eye intensified, blossoming into a full-blown ache, a throbbing pulse that mirrored the faint light of the wanderer on his screen. It was more than just a match. It was a resonance, an echo across millennia. The ancient Sumerians, thousands of years ago, had seen this same celestial object, and they had imbued it with a profound, almost terrifying significance. They hadn't just observed it, they had recorded it, connecting it directly to their enigmatic gods. Aris felt a jolt of recognition, a familiar, unsettling wave washing over him. This wasn't just abstract data anymore. This was a direct link. A thread pulled taut between the distant past and the present. He suddenly remembered a recurring dream he'd had as a child, one he'd long suppressed. A vivid image of a shimmering reddish-orange orb hanging in a black sky, its light casting long alien shadows over a landscape that felt both ancient and eerily familiar. He'd always dismissed it as a childhood fantasy, a product of too many late-night science fiction novels. But now, seeing the image of the Wanderer, seeing the Sumerian pictograms, the dream resurfaced with a terrifying clarity. It wasn't just a dream, it was a memory, or perhaps a premonition. The air in the dome grew heavy, thick with unspoken truths and the ghosts of forgotten ages. He shivered despite the rising desert heat, realizing he had just stumbled upon the first tangible piece of a puzzle far older and more dangerous than he had ever dared to conceive. This wanderer wasn't just a star, it was a record keeper, a celestial clock ticking towards an unknown moment. If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this has resonated with you. So, empower this content, like it now, and send it to someone who needs to see this. The sun had fully risen now, a blazing orb in the cloudless sky, its harsh light cutting through the dome's filtered windows. Aris, still hunched over his console, felt the exhaustion deep in his bones, but his mind raced, fueled by the monumental discovery. The connection between the Wanderer and K4005 was undeniable, a whispered truth across 5 millennia. It wasn't just a faint astronomical observation, it was a direct cultural record, an ancient testimony. The Sumerians weren't just gazing at the stars, they were chronicling visitors, celestial navigators who moved with purpose. He pulled up more details on the Anunnaki from his database, descriptions of beings of immense stature, wisdom, and technological prowess. Beings who came from the sky, who taught humanity agriculture, writing, and civilization itself. Beings who, according to Sumerian mythology, came from a mysterious planet known as Nibiru, a planet often referred to as a crosser or planet of the crossing. The implications were staggering, almost too grand for his rational scientific mind to fully accept, yet too compelling to dismiss. He began to cross-reference the orbital data he had painstakingly gathered for the Wanderer with the hypothetical orbital paths proposed for Nibiru in various ancient astronaut theories. The mainstream scientific community had largely relegated Nibiru to the realm of pseudoscience, dismissing it as a misinterpretation of ancient texts, an astronomical impossibility. But Aris, with his new data, felt a surge of conviction. What if the ancient texts weren't metaphors? What if they were literal records, painstakingly preserved accounts of a real celestial body and its inhabitants? His fingers flew across the keyboard, inputting complex orbital mechanics, running simulations that would make a NASA engineer's head spin. The equations were dizzying, factoring in gravitational perturbations, light years of travel, and the immense timescales of cosmic events. He had developed his own predictive algorithms, designed to find patterns in chaos, to seek out the subtle influences of massive, unseen objects. The processing power of his custom-built supercomputer, nicknamed Oracle, whirred and clicked, its internal temperature climbing steadily. The desert outside baked under the relentless sun, the air shimmering with heat above the cracked earth. Yet inside the dome, a different kind of heat was building, the heat of revelation, of a secret slowly being unearthed. Aris hadn't eaten or slept in over 24 hours, but his hunger and fatigue were distant concerns, overshadowed by the intellectual chase. His only sustenance was the endless flow of lukewarm coffee and the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He paused, leaning back, and took a deep, shaky breath. The screen flickered, displaying the output of his latest simulation. It was a complex orbital projection, tracing the path of the Wanderer over vast stretches of time. And there it was, a striking, almost perfect correlation between his calculated trajectory and the proposed eccentric elliptical orbit of Nibiru, as described in various interpretations of ancient texts. The period of return was vast, thousands of years, but the pattern was unmistakable. The Sumerians weren't just describing a vague celestial body. They were charting its course, observing its periodic appearances. A sudden, sharp tremor ran through the dome, rattling the shelves of books and causing a small stack of printouts to slide to the floor. It wasn't an earthquake, it felt more localized, a deep resonance that seemed to vibrate through the very bedrock of the mesa. Aris's head snapped up, his eyes scanning the room. The instruments, usually stable, showed a momentary spike in ambient energy readings. What was that? He quickly checked the seismic sensors he had installed around the mesa, hoping it was just a localized geological event. But the readings were too precise, too rhythmic. It was a single, powerful pulse, emanating not from beneath the earth, but seemingly from within the dome itself, or perhaps from the very air around it. He walked slowly towards the primary mirror, his steps hesitant. The massive glass surface seemed to hum faintly, catching the harsh sunlight and reflecting it in blinding flashes around the room. It was like looking into a giant, silent eye, one that had just blinked. As he got closer, he noticed something on the edge of the mirror's frame, something he'd never seen before despite maintaining the telescope for years. Etched into the aged metal, barely visible beneath layers of dust and grime, was a faint, intricate symbol. It wasn't modern, nor was it any symbol he recognized from his extensive studies of terrestrial cultures. It was geometric, almost crystalline in its precision, yet imbued with an organic flow, resembling a series of interlocking, stylized wings. It felt ancient, alien and deeply unsettling. He reached out a trembling finger, tracing its cold, smooth lines. The symbol seemed to pulse with a faint internal light as he touched it, a warmth that spread through his fingertips and up his arm. It was a subtle, almost psychic vibration, a whisper from another time, another world. This wasn't just an object, it was a sign, an inscription, waiting for the right moment, for the right observer to reveal itself. This changed everything. His perception of the world around him, already fractured, now felt completely upended. The silence of the desert wasn't empty, it was pregnant with untold stories, with forgotten echoes. The connection wasn't just intellectual, it was physical, visceral. The symbol on the telescope's frame seemed to burn into Aris's mind, a cryptic message carved into his very consciousness. He pulled his hand back quickly, feeling a strange tingling sensation, almost like static electricity, still lingering on his fingertips. It was more than just an etching. It felt like a living thing, an inert object momentarily awakened by his touch, or perhaps by the proximity of the wanderer. The air in the dome, already thick with unspoken tension, now felt charged with an indefinable energy. He squinted at the symbol, trying to decipher its meaning, running through his mental archives of ancient scripts and forgotten iconography. Nothing quite matched. It was unique, yet strangely familiar, like a word on the tip of his tongue. His professional life had been a series of careful calculations and meticulously verified data. His personal life, a carefully guarded fortress against the chaos of the world. Yet this symbol, this ethereal pulse, had bypassed all his defenses, striking at a primal core of intuition he rarely acknowledged. He pulled out his phone, a beat-up iPhone 12, and snapped several high-resolution photos of the etching, zooming in, adjusting the light. He knew he had to document it, but a part of him also felt a deep, instinctive urge to keep it secret, to protect it from the dismissive gazes of the mainstream. He returned to his console, his mind reeling. The implications of the symbol, coupled with the orbital correlation, were immense. It suggested not just observation, but perhaps preparation. Was this dome, this very telescope placed here for a reason, connected to something far older than its steel and glass suggested? He looked around the dusty, cluttered space, suddenly seeing it with new eyes. Every artifact, every forgotten piece of equipment, every speck of dust seemed to hold a hidden meaning, a whisper of a grander purpose. Thorne was, at his core, a seeker of truth. Born in a quiet suburb of Boston, Massachusetts, he had grown up with an insatiable curiosity, devouring books on everything from astronomy to archaeology, spending hours under the clear New England night sky, dreaming of distant worlds. He had a natural disdain for dogma, a healthy skepticism that often bordered on outright rebellion. It was this rebellious streak, coupled with his undeniable brilliance, that had led him to challenge established scientific paradigms, eventually leading to his ostracization from the hallowed halls of academia. His current life, here in the desert, was one of self-imposed exile. After the public shaming by Professor Finch, a man who had once been like a second father, Aris had packed his bags, sold his quaint townhouse in Cambridge, and bought this remote mesa with the last of his inheritance. He had poured every penny, every ounce of his remaining academic reputation into building this private observatory, this sanctuary of unconventional thought. He had convinced a few wealthy, eccentric benefactors, mostly Silicon Valley types who dabbled in conspiracy theories and alternative science, to fund his independent research. They appreciated his maverick spirit, even if they didn't fully grasp the depth of his work. He lived frugally, his diet consisting mostly of instant noodles, canned chili, and vast quantities of cheap coffee. His routine was monastic: observe, research, analyze, repeat. His only companion was a grumpy old desert tortoise he'd named Ziegler, after a forgotten German philosopher who occasionally ambled into the dome, offering silent, slow-moving companionship. The desert, with its vast emptiness and ancient secrets, was both his prison and his liberation. It allowed him the freedom to think, to question, to challenge without the stifling weight of academic peer review or institutional dogma. What he sought, perhaps more than anything, was validation. Validation not just for his theories, but for the nagging sense that something fundamental about human history had been deliberately excised, carefully erased from the collective consciousness. He felt it in his bones, a primal hum that echoed the frequency of the desert wind. He yearned to fill the void left by his personal losses, particularly the quiet disappointment of his family, who had never quite understood his unconventional path. His father, a pragmatic engineer, had always wanted him to pursue something useful, something that paid the bills and secured a comfortable retirement. His mother, bless her heart, simply worried. His greatest fear wasn't professional failure. It was the fear of being wrong, of wasting his life chasing phantoms. But deep down, a more profound fear lurked, the fear that he was right and that the truth he was unearthing was far more terrifying than any phantom. He carried the burden of past disappointments, the sting of being labeled a crackpot, a charlatan, a madman. He tried to forget the look on Professor Finch's face, the pity mixed with condemnation, but it haunted his quiet moments, a ghost in the machine of his memories. He remembered one night, years ago, at a research symposium in Washington, D.C., a chance encounter with Dr. Lena Petrova, a brilliant linguist specializing in ancient Near Eastern languages. They had briefly connected over a shared skepticism of mainstream archaeological interpretations. She had looked at him with an intensity that mirrored his own, a flicker of understanding in her deep-set eyes that transcended mere professional courtesy. She had quietly, almost conspiratorially, mentioned the existence of unpublishable artifacts, items found in classified digs, then quickly dismissed by officials. "Some truths," she had whispered, "are too inconvenient for history." The memory was a spark, reigniting a sense of purpose. Her words and that knowing glance had altered the trajectory of his lonely pursuit. It wasn't just him. Others saw it too. He wasn't entirely alone in this cosmic conspiracy. If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this has resonated with you. So empower this content, like it now, and send it to someone who needs to see this. The memory of Lena Petrova's knowing glance and her cryptic words energized Aris. It wasn't just a fleeting encounter, it was a connection, a silent affirmation that he wasn't tilting at windmills alone. The air in the dome, still heavy with the scent of old paper and strange metallic undertones, seemed to thrum with a new intensity. He felt a renewed sense of urgency, a desperate need to dig deeper, to pull back the veil that obscured humanity's true origins. He spent the next few hours cross-referencing the symbol he'd found on the telescope with every piece of iconography in his vast digital library. Egyptian hieroglyphs, Mayan glyphs, Celtic knots, Native American petroglyphs, even obscure alchemical diagrams. Nothing. The symbol remained stubbornly unique, an orphan in the grand lexicon of human design. This uniqueness, however, only solidified his conviction. It wasn't an earthly creation, or at least not one from a recognized human civilization. It was something else, something other. The implications spiraled in his mind. If the Sumerians saw the Wanderer and described its inhabitants, and now an ancient alien symbol appeared on his modern instrument, was it a coincidence? Or was it a deliberate breadcrumb, a message left for those willing to see? The climate outside was shifting, the blazing mid-morning sun giving way to an ominous darkening of the sky, a swift, dramatic change often seen in the high desert. Distant thunder rumbled, a low growl that mirrored the unsettling questions churning in Aris's mind. He decided to shift his focus from purely astronomical data to the archaeological. He pulled up his extensive files on anomalous artifacts, objects found in contexts that defied conventional understanding. He thought of the Baghdad battery, the Antikythera mechanism, and countless other out-of-place artifacts that mainstream archaeology often explained away with convoluted theories or simply ignored. What if these weren't anomalies, but rather fragments of a larger, forgotten technological inheritance, remnants of a time when humanity was not alone? His gaze drifted to a dusty framed photograph on a shelf above his main console. It was an old, black-and-white picture of his grandfather, a stern-looking man in a rumpled suit, standing proudly beside a dig site in rural Pennsylvania. His grandfather, a self-taught amateur archaeologist, had spent his life meticulously documenting local Native American burial mounds, convinced there was more to their history than officially acknowledged. He had often spoken of star people in their legends, beings who brought gifts of knowledge and medicine from the heavens. Aris had inherited his grandfather's stubborn curiosity. his willingness to look beyond the accepted narrative. He remembered a particular summer when he was just a kid, maybe 10 years old, helping his grandfather sift through earth at one of the mounds. They'd found a strange, polished stone, unlike any local rock, etched with symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the evening light. His grandfather had kept it, hidden away in a velvet pouch, calling it a star gift. Eris had dismissed it as a child's fancy, but now the memory resurfaced with a chilling clarity. Was that stone, those symbols, connected to what he was seeing now? Had his grandfather unknowingly touched a piece of the same grand puzzle? The thunder outside grew louder, closer, echoing through the dome. A torrential downpour began to lash against the metal roof, sounding like 1,000 tiny drums. The desert, usually so parched, was drinking greedily. This sudden, violent storm felt symbolic, as if the very elements were reacting to the gravity of his discoveries. He opened a file he rarely accessed, one labeled Classified Anomalies, Declassified. It contained redacted government reports, grainy photographs, and vague descriptions of discoveries made in remote parts of the world, often involving unexplained energy readings or unusual geological formations. He filtered the data by keyword: winged disk, celestial body, ancient visitors. The search yielded hundreds of hits, most of them vague and unhelpful, but a few stood out. One report detailed an archaeological dig in the Zagros Mountains of Iraq in the late 1940s, a site near ancient Sumerian ruins. The report, heavily redacted, mentioned the discovery of a large metallic cylinder emitting unusual radiation. The cylinder was described as having intricate non-terrestrial engravings and a pulsating faint light. The excavation was abruptly halted, the site sealed, and the artifacts transferred to an undisclosed facility for further study. The language was deliberately vague, but the implications were terrifyingly clear. Someone, somewhere, had found something significant, something that challenged the established order, and had buried it. Eris zoomed in on a faint, almost pixelated image attached to the report. It was a blurry photograph of a fragment of the metallic cylinder, and there, faintly visible on its surface, was a symbol. The same geometric, winged disc-like symbol he had just found etched into his telescope. A cold dread seeped into his bones. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't random. The symbol was a signature, a brand mark, left by the same entities across vast distances and unfathomable stretches of time. This was the Virada II, a major, more powerful discovery that challenged everything he believed. He had found a partial truth, something that directly connected his isolated desert observatory to the world of ancient gods, to the secretive corridors of government power, and to the chilling reality of non-human intervention. But the true scope of it, the why and the how, still eluded him. He was a small man in a small dome, staring at a picture of a fragment that whispered of giants. The tension in the room was palpable, thick like the storm clouds outside. He felt like he was standing on the edge of an abyss, and the only way out was to jump. The truth, he realized, was not just out there. It was actively being suppressed, woven into the very fabric of human history, hidden in plain sight. The rain outside intensified, drumming a relentless rhythm against the dome, as if the heavens themselves were trying to punctuate Eris's monumental discovery. The symbol, now unequivocally linked to an ancient artifact recovered from a classified dig, was a hammer blow to his carefully constructed scientific skepticism. This wasn't just a pattern, it was a connection, a message echoing from across the millennia, a direct link between the celestial wanderer and a physical object buried deep in the earth. The air, heavy with the scent of wet desert dust and ozone from the storm, felt charged with an almost electric energy, making the hairs on his arms stand on end. He spent the next several hours meticulously comparing the blurry image from the declassified report with his own high-resolution photos of the symbol on the telescope. Every curve, every line, every geometric intersection was identical. It was undeniable. The implications reverberated through his mind like the distant thunder. Someone or something had deliberately placed that symbol on his telescope. Was it a test, a warning, a guiding hand? He felt a prickle of unease. He was no longer just an observer. He was a participant, an unwitting player in a game that spanned eons. The narrative was shifting, accelerating. The subtle hum of his computer, the gentle whirring of the telescope's mechanisms, the steady beat of the rain, all blended into a symphony of escalating tension. He recalled fragments from his studies of ancient Sumerian myths, particularly those dealing with the Apkallu, the wise ones, who were said to have come from the waters, teaching humanity during primordial times. These weren't just fishmen. They were beings described as having advanced knowledge, capable of building great structures and imparting profound wisdom. Could they be connected to the Anunnaki, and thus to Nibiru? The lines between myth and history were blurring into a single, terrifying truth. Aris leaned back, rubbing his tired eyes. He needed to think, to piece together this fragmented mosaic. He pulled up maps of ancient Mesopotamia, overlaying them with modern satellite imagery. He traced the paths of ancient rivers, the locations of long-lost cities, and the sites of unexplained anomalies. Every dot, every line, every geological feature seemed to whisper secrets. He questioned, what if the greatest human achievement wasn't our own ingenuity, but rather a reflection of advanced tutelage? Could our technological leaps be echoes of forgotten lessons, not original sparks? These thoughts, once fringe, now felt undeniably real, grounded in the hard data he was accumulating. He remembered a conversation he'd had with an elderly Native American elder, a Navajo medicine man named Hani, during his early research years. Hani had spoken of star brothers who visited their ancestors, bringing knowledge and prophecies. He had warned Aris that some truths were not meant for all, that they held a power that could shatter the world if mishandled. Hani had looked at him with ancient, knowing eyes and said, "The desert keeps its secrets, but it also remembers, and sometimes it decides to speak." Aris hadn't understood the full weight of those words then, but now, sitting in this dome, surrounded by the desert's vast memory, he felt their chilling resonance. Suddenly, a small, subtle detail caught his eye on the declassified report image. Below the primary symbol on the metallic cylinder fragment, almost completely obscured by shadow and resolution degradation, was a series of faint, almost microscopic markings. They weren't cuneiform, nor were they any recognizable script. They looked like a sequence of tiny geometric dots and lines, arranged in an impossibly complex pattern. He ran a digital enhancement filter over the image, pushing his computer's capabilities to their limits. Slowly, painstakingly, the hidden pattern began to resolve. It wasn't a language, it was a star map, a highly detailed, incredibly precise star map, unlike any he had ever seen. It depicted constellations known and unknown, nebulae and stellar nurseries. And at its center, circled by a ring of larger dots, was a distinct repeating symbol, the same winged disk, the same signature he'd found on his telescope. But this map showed not just where the wanderer was, but also a network of other points, a series of coordinates that spanned vast tracts of the galaxy. It was a map of interstellar travel, of routes, of destinations. Aris felt a cold knot form in his stomach. This wasn't just about ancient visitors. This was about a civilization, an empire with interstellar capabilities. It was a civilization that had visited Earth, influenced its development, and then, for reasons unknown, retreated, leaving behind subtle clues, waiting for the right moment, for humanity to develop enough to find them. The metallic cylinder wasn't just an artifact, it was a navigational tool, a record of journeys taken, of places visited. A third emotional explosion ripped through him. He remembered a heated argument he'd had with Professor Finch right before his dismissal. Finch had casually, almost mockingly said, "Aris, you're chasing ghosts. There's nothing in those old texts that isn't already explained by our established understanding of ancient cultures. You're trying to invent a cosmic conspiracy because you can't accept the simpler truth." But then, Finch had paused, his eyes uncharacteristically clouded, and added, almost to himself, Unless there are truths that shouldn't be simpler." Aris had dismissed it as a throwaway comment, a momentary lapse in Finch's usual arrogance. But now it resonated with a sinister weight. Was Finch hiding something? Did he know more than he let on? Had he been part of the cover-up, or merely a pawn in a larger game? The thought was a bitter pill, turning his mentor into a potential antagonist, someone who knew a fundamental lie had been perpetrated. The lie wasn't just about history. It was about human agency, about who truly controlled the narrative of our existence. If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this has resonated with you. So, empower this content. Like it now and send it to someone who needs to see this. The revelation about Professor Finch's cryptic remark, a veiled admission of a deeper, perhaps more unsettling truth, sent a chill down Aris's spine, far colder than the desert rain still lashing against the dome. It transformed Finch from a dismissive academic into a potential gatekeeper or even an unwitting accomplice in a conspiracy of silence. The star map, revealed on the metallic fragment, pointed to something far grander than mere visits. It suggested a methodical exploration, a detailed charting of interstellar space by an ancient, highly advanced civilization. The weight of this understanding pressed down on him, making the air feel impossibly dense. He felt an almost palpable presence in the dome now, as if the ancient entities he was investigating were observing him, their gaze extending across the vast cosmic distances through the veils of time. The hum of the computer and the gentle whir of the telescope became background noise to the frantic rhythm of his own heartbeat. He wasn't just studying history, he was uncovering a living, breathing history, one that was perhaps still active. The feeling was unsettling, a mix of exhilaration and profound vulnerability. Aris stared at the star map, tracing the faint lines with his finger on the screen. He realized it wasn't just a static map. It had layers, depths. He activated a function in his specialized software that allowed for holographic projection of astronomical data. The map shimmered to life in the center of the dome. A three-dimensional galaxy spread before him, tiny points of light representing stars, nebulae swirling in delicate colors. The winged disk symbol, representing the Wanderer or Nibiru, pulsed at a central point, radiating lines outward to other marked systems. It was breathtaking, terrifying. He tried to identify some of the known constellations to orient himself within this alien cartography. Many were recognizable, but others were obscured by clusters of stars he couldn't place, or by faint, almost ethereal wisps of energy that seemed to connect certain points. These wisps, he realized, were gravitational pathways, cosmic superhighways that allowed for faster-than-light travel. This wasn't just a map, it was a schematic of an ancient interstellar transit system. The Anunnaki weren't just visitors, they were cosmic architects, shaping pathways through the void. His mind raced, connecting disparate pieces of information, the ancient megalithic structures around the world, Stonehenge, the pyramids of Giza, Teotihuacan, often aligned with celestial bodies or specific astronomical events. What if these alignments weren't just primitive observatories, but markers, beacons, or even landing sites for these interstellar travelers? What if the geometry of these structures wasn't just architectural, but encoded with the same cosmic coordinates, the same knowledge found on the Anunnaki star map? He remembered a particular photograph from an early expedition to the Nazca Lines in Peru. One of the geoglyphs, a massive bird-like figure, had always intrigued him. He zoomed in on its image in his database. He noticed for the first time a subtle geometric pattern within its wing structure, a sequence of lines that, when isolated, seemed to mirror a part of the Anunnaki symbol. It was faint, almost camouflaged by the overall design, but it was there. This wasn't just art, it was a signature, left thousands of miles apart, across continents and cultures, woven into the very landscape. He pulled up another obscure document, an old scientific paper from the 1960s by a reclusive British engineer who theorized about planetary resonance structures. The paper, largely dismissed as eccentric, proposed that certain ancient sites were designed not just for observation, but to interact with specific planetary frequencies, creating a kind of harmonic resonance. At the time, Aris had filed it away as intriguing but unsubstantiated. Now, with the star map and the Nazca connection, it felt disturbingly plausible. What if these structures were part of a vast global network, a communication system, or even an energy grid built by the Anunnaki? The feeling of being watched intensified. It wasn't paranoia, it was an acute awareness, a sixth sense awakened by the profound revelations. He looked out the dome's main window, beyond the rain-slicked metal, and into the vast, empty expanse of the desert. The storm had begun to recede, the clouds breaking, revealing patches of dark, bruised sky. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmering flickered at the very edge of his vision, just beyond the perimeter of the mesa. It was gone before he could focus on it, a trick of the light, perhaps, or a lingering effect of the storm, but it left him with an unsettling certainty that he wasn't alone. He thought of all the ancient cultures that spoke of sky gods or star people, the Egyptians with their Neteru, the Maya with their Ku, the Hopi with their Kachinas. All these disparate mythologies, separated by vast distances and cultural barriers, shared a common thread. Beings from the heavens who interacted with humanity, imparting knowledge, sometimes demanding worship, sometimes offering guidance. It was too consistent, too pervasive, to be mere coincidence or independent invention. It spoke of a universal narrative, a shared, suppressed memory. This was the Virada III. The protagonist, Aris, realized he was enmeshed in something far greater than he had ever imagined. He understood that powerful forces were observing him, silent entities guiding his steps, pushing him towards an inevitable confrontation with a truth that transcended human history. The holographic star map pulsed with an alien light, illuminating his face with a chilling glow. He felt a profound sense of awe, mixed with a growing terror. The world he knew, the universe he believed in, was shattering around him, revealing a reality far more complex, far more ancient, and far more manipulated than any textbook had ever dared to suggest. The story here became somber, deeper, more profoundly unsettling. The silence of the desert was no longer empty. It was filled with the silent eyes of unknown watchers, the echoes of their ancient commands. The holographic star map continued to pulse in the center of the dome, a silent, celestial conductor leading Aris through the symphony of his disintegrating reality. The rain had ceased, leaving the desert air crisp and clean, but the chill that had settled in Aris's bones remained. He felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the very act of knowing had stripped away layers of protection, leaving him naked before the gaze of unseen forces. The thought of Professor Finch's knowing half-comment, his possible complicity or knowledge of the cover-up gnawed at him. It was a betrayal, not of friendship, but of scientific integrity, of the sacred pursuit of truth. He began to search his personal archives, cross-referencing names associated with Finch's research, looking for any hidden connections, any subtle hints of a network. Finch had always been a formidable academic, highly respected, his reputation impeccable. But Aris now saw a shadow behind that facade, a subtle manipulation, a deliberate steering away from certain lines of inquiry. He thought of all the times Finch had subtly discouraged him from pursuing certain fringe theories, always with a polite smile, always with a logical academic reason, but now those reasons felt like carefully constructed walls. He remembered a conference in Geneva years ago where Finch had introduced him to a man named Dr. Elias Vance, a seemingly unassuming historian specializing in ancient Near Eastern cultures. Vance had been intensely interested in Aris's early work on unusual energy signatures, asking surprisingly pointed questions that went beyond academic curiosity. Vance had possessed a peculiar intensity in his eyes, a glint that suggested he knew more than he let on. Aris had dismissed it at the time, but now Vance's image resurfaced with a sinister weight. Was Vance connected to Finch? Were they part of a larger organization dedicated to guarding these ancient secrets? The holographic map flickered as if responding to his thoughts, highlighting a faint, previously unnoticed energy signature within one of the depicted star systems. It was a subtle anomaly, almost lost amidst the vastness of the projection, but Aris's trained eye caught it. He zoomed in, the tiny point of light expanding, resolving into a swirling nebula, and within the nebula another, smaller pulse. It wasn't stellar, it was an artificial signature, faint but distinct, like a beacon. A beacon perhaps from a specific location, a place of origin, or a current staging ground. He recognized the general area of the nebula. It was in the constellation Cygnus, a region of space known for its peculiar X-ray emissions and mysterious, powerful radiation sources. Ancient myths, particularly from Native American tribes like the Lakota, spoke of the Black Road or the Path of Souls in the Milky Way, often associated with Cygnus, a place of origin for spiritual beings or a gateway to other dimensions. The convergence of scientific data and ancient mythology was no longer coincidental. It was a deliberate echo. The feeling of fear, of loss, began to grow. Loss of innocence, loss of the comfortable illusion of human autonomy. The loss of his mentor, transformed into a potential adversary. It was a dizzying, disorienting sensation, like falling through an endless void. He felt a pang of profound confusion. Why would they hide this? Why the elaborate deception? What was the ultimate goal of these ancient visitors, these Anunnaki? Suddenly, the screen on his main console, the one displaying the live feed from The Wanderer, flickered violently. The image distorted, colors bleeding, pixels scattering. A wave of static washed over it, like an old television set struggling to find a signal. And then, through the haze of interference, a symbol appeared. It wasn't the winged disc. This was different. It was a single immense eye, stylized and ancient, yet somehow alive. Its pupil a swirling vortex of deep blues and greens. It was terrifyingly familiar, like something from a forgotten nightmare or a primal memory. Aris gasped, stumbling back from the console, knocking his chair over with a clatter. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drum. The symbol of the eye, so vivid, so intensely real, seemed to bore into his very soul. He'd seen it before, or something like it. Years ago, while researching ancient occult symbols, he'd come across a brief mention of the all-seeing eye in a rare medieval grimoire described as the Eye of Anu, the supreme deity of the Sumerian pantheon, the father of the Anunnaki. It was a symbol of omnipresent watchfulness, of cosmic authority. The image lingered on the screen for only a few agonizing seconds, vibrating with an unseen energy before dissolving back into static, then returning to the faint, pulsing light of The Wanderer. But the impact was irreversible. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a direct communication, a profound, undeniable fourth emotional explosion. A symbol, had appeared in the wrong place, at the wrong time, or perhaps at precisely the right time, a direct message from the ancient forces he was investigating. It was a vision that tore the line between the real and the impossible, between scientific observation and divine intervention. He felt a cold, ancient voice whisper his name in his mind, not a sound heard with his ears, but a thought imprinted directly onto his consciousness. Aris, the truth awaits. The voice was resonant, deep, yet strangely devoid of emotion, like the cold vacuum of space itself. It filled him with an overwhelming sense of dread, but also a terrifying compulsion to follow, to understand. He was being called, summoned by an intelligence beyond human comprehension. The Wanderer wasn't just a celestial object, it was a cosmic messenger, and Aris was now irrevocably entangled in its ancient alien purpose. The game had just changed. He was no longer just an observer. He was being drawn into the very heart of the mystery, a pawn on a cosmic chessboard. The path ahead was dark, but he knew with a terrifying certainty that he had no choice but to follow. If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this has resonated with you. So, empower this content, like it now, and send it to someone who needs to see this. The lingering echo of the ancient voice, the spectral image of the all-seeing eye, burned themselves into Aris's consciousness, leaving him reeling, trembling at his desk. The experience was visceral, crossing the chasm between intellectual pursuit and direct, undeniable revelation. It wasn't a hallucination, it was a transmission, a direct imprint on his mind, a confirmation of the guiding, observing forces he had only theorized about moments before. The air in the dome, thick with the scent of ozone and the subtle, lingering metallic tang, seemed to crackle with an unspoken tension, an energy that hinted at the profound shift his reality had just undergone. He stared blankly at the screen, the image of the Wanderer now a dull, steady pulse, as if the communication had drained its immediate energy. He tried to rationalize, to find a scientific explanation for the voice, for the eye. A burst of solar radiation interfering with the screen, a neurological event caused by extreme fatigue, but the explanation felt hollow, inadequate against the sheer, undeniable impact of the experience. It had resonated with a primal part of his being, a part that instinctively recognized something ancient and powerful. His mind flashed back to the Sumerian texts, to the descriptions of Anu, the father of the gods, whose gaze could encompass the universe. The Anunnaki weren't just powerful, they were omniscient, their reach extending beyond the physical into the very thoughts and perceptions of humanity. He felt a profound sense of despair and dread. If this was true, then humanity was not master of its own destiny. It was merely a carefully cultivated species, a cosmic experiment, observed and guided by architects from another world. The implications for free will, for human history, for everything humanity held dear, were devastating. He recalled another obscure, declassified document from his archives, one that detailed a series of unexplained disappearances in the American Southwest during the Cold War. Ranchers, scientists, even military personnel had vanished without a trace, often near remote, geologically anomalous sites. The official explanation had always been accidental exposure to harsh desert conditions or unexplained geological phenomenon. But now, Aris saw a sinister pattern. Were these disappearances related to the Anunnaki? Were they collecting specimens, silencing witnesses, or perhaps even preparing for something? He decided he needed a new approach, a different perspective. He turned away from the scientific data, from the cold, hard numbers, and instead focused on the mythical. He pulled out an old leather-bound copy of Zecharia Sitchin's The 12th Planet, a book he had dismissed years ago as intriguing but unscientific. Now Sitchin's controversial interpretations of Sumerian texts, depicting the Anunnaki as flesh and blood beings from Nibiru, felt chillingly prescient. Sitchin had spoken of the Anunnaki creating humanity as a slave race to mine gold, of their genetic manipulation, of their return. It had all seemed like fantastical fiction, but now Aris found himself nodding grimly at each controversial claim. He opened a private encrypted chat channel he had with a small network of fellow unconventional researchers, the Fringe Brigade, as they jokingly called themselves. Lena Petrova was one of them, as was a retired NASA cryptographer named Dr. Ben Carter, and an eccentric, independently wealthy archaeologist named Professor Clara Maxwell, who had a knack for finding lost texts. He briefly, carefully outlined his recent discoveries: the Wanderer's orbital correlation, the ancient symbol, the metallic cylinder, and the star map. He omitted the voice and the eye. Some truths were still too raw, too unbelievable, even for them. Lena responded almost immediately, her text message appearing on his screen like a burst of light in the deepening gloom. Aris, this is massive. The symbol, are you sure? There's a persistent rumor in certain circles, an unconfirmed report of a similar symbol found on a stone tablet recovered from a dig in the Arabian Peninsula, dating back to the Ubaid period. The official report said it was erosion patterns, but the local folklore speaks of celestial architects who built the first cities. Her words confirmed his fears, solidifying the global reach of this ancient influence. Ben Carter chimed in. Aris, I've been tracking some peculiar gravitational anomalies from deep space, way beyond the Oort cloud. They're subtle, but consistent, not natural planetary wobble, something else, moving with purpose. Could be a fleet or something vast traversing the void. His words hit Aris like a physical blow. A fleet. The idea of a full-scale return, not just a single wandering planet, but an organized, deliberate re-engagement, sent a wave of cold dread through him. Then Clara Maxwell weighed in, her message succinct and chilling. Aris, I found something. An ancient text buried in the Vatican archives detailing the Great Retreat describes a mass exodus from Earth by the Sky Lords after a cataclysm, with promises of a reunion when the Star of Crossing returns. Says they left behind watchers to guide humanity to its destined purpose. Watchers. The word echoed in his mind, connecting directly to the feeling of being observed, to the all-seeing eye. This was the Virada 4. The protagonist, Aris, had accessed a devastating truth. He was no longer just piecing together fragmented data. He was seeing the full, horrifying scope of a millennia-spanning plan. The Anunnaki weren't just ancient visitors, they were cosmic colonizers, engineers of human civilization who had retreated, leaving behind subtle clues and active observers, all orchestrated around the periodic return of Nibiru. The metallic cylinder, the star map, the symbols. They were not just records, but living artifacts, pieces of a grand design that was now, finally, revealing itself. He was witnessing a truth so vast, so profound, it threatened to unravel the very fabric of human reality. The ultimate revelation, he knew, was still beyond his grasp, but the veil had been torn. This was the moment he had always feared and desperately sought. The collective messages from the Fringe Brigade, Lena's archaeological rumors, Ben's gravitational anomalies, and Clara's chilling discovery of Watchers and the Great Retreat text, converged into a singular, devastating truth that hit Aris with the force of a cosmic wave. His hands trembled as he reread their frantic replies, each word a hammer blow against the remaining walls of his scientific skepticism. The air in the dome, now still and heavy after the storm, felt pregnant with an impending revelation, a shift so profound it would irrevocably alter humanity's perception of its place in the universe. He felt a primal sense of fear, a deep-seated terror that threatened to overwhelm him. It wasn't the fear of personal danger, but the crushing weight of knowing. He wasn't just unearthing history, he was unearthing the blueprint for humanity's future, a future orchestrated by unseen, ancient hands. The truth was far more complex than a simple narrative of ancient aliens. It was a story of manipulation, of genetic engineering, of a species carefully cultivated and guided for millennia. He looked again at the holographic star map, the pulsing winged disk of Nibiru at its core, radiating lines to countless other star systems. He zoomed in on the Cygnus Nebula, where Ben had detected the artificial energy signatures. The nebula, once a beautiful cosmic cloud, now felt like a lurking predator, a staging ground for forces beyond human comprehension. The Watchers, mentioned in Clara's text, were not just metaphors, they were real, active, observing every move, guiding every step towards a preordained destiny. Aris recalled vague, unsettling dreams from childhood. Dreams of being observed, of a fleeting glimpse of impossibly tall figures in shimmering armor, their eyes like twin suns. He'd always dismissed them as childish nightmares, but now they resurfaced with a terrifying clarity, imbued with the weight of prophecy. He had been watched, perhaps his entire life, cultivated like a crop, groomed to uncover this truth at precisely the right moment. The thought sent a shiver down his spine. Was his entire life, his rebellious academic career, his exile to this desert dome, merely a carefully planned sequence of events, designed to lead him here, to this very moment? He activated an old, experimental piece of equipment he'd built years ago, a low-frequency, wide-spectrum electromagnetic pulse generator designed to detect subtle energy fluctuations in the environment. He called it the ether scanner. He hadn't used it in years, as it was notoriously unstable and prone to false positives, but now, compelled by an inexplicable urge, he switched it on. The device hummed to life, its archaic vacuum tubes glowing with an eerie orange light, its needles oscillating wildly across its analog display. The readouts, initially chaotic, slowly began to coalesce into a pattern. A distinct, rhythmic pulse emanating from outside the dome, from somewhere deep in the desert. It wasn't natural. It was a modulated signal, faint but persistent, a signature he recognized from the metallic cylinder report. It was the same unique radiation pattern, the same strange energy signature, and it was coming from the very ground beneath the mesa. He grabbed his worn-out field jacket, his old canteen, and a powerful tactical flashlight. He had to go out. He had to see. He knew it was dangerous, perhaps suicidal, but an irresistible force was pulling him, a cosmic current dragging him towards the epicenter of the mystery. He felt a profound, almost desperate surge of adrenaline. His instincts, honed by years of solitary research, screamed at him to proceed, to confront the unknown, to finally touch the truth that had haunted him for so long. Stepping out of the dome, the cool night air embraced him, carrying the earthy scent of damp sand and the faint, sweet smell of desert creosote. The sky was a velvet canvas, dusted with countless stars, each a pinprick of ancient light, each a silent witness. The hum from the ether scanner, now portable and slung over his shoulder, grew stronger, guiding him like a homing beacon. He descended the rough, winding path carved into the mesa, his flashlight cutting a shaky path through the gloom. The sounds of the desert, the rustle of unseen creatures, the whisper of the wind seemed to amplify, morphing into a symphony of unsettling whispers. He followed the signal, moving away from the dome, towards a cluster of ancient, weather-beaten rock formations known locally as the Whispering Giants. These towering monoliths, carved by millennia of wind and sand, were covered in intricate petroglyphs, some dating back thousands of years. Local legends spoke of them as sacred sites, places where the veil between worlds was thin, where the star people once walked among their ancestors. As he approached the Whispering Giants, the hum of the ether scanner became a high-pitched whine. The air grew heavy, almost oppressive, thick with an unseen energy. The ground beneath his feet vibrated subtly, a low thrum that resonated deep in his bones. His flashlight beam swept across the ancient petroglyphs, illuminating stylized figures, strange symbols, and celestial motifs. Many were recognizable, but others were utterly alien, geometric patterns that seemed to shift and dance in the flickering light. He stopped before the largest of the monoliths, a colossal rock face covered in a dense tapestry of carvings. The ether scanner was now screaming, its needle maxed out, its internal lights flashing wildly. And there, etched into the rough stone, pulsating with a faint internal luminescence that seemed to defy the darkness, was a symbol. It was the winged disk, the Anunnaki signature, but larger, more intricate, more alive than any he had seen before. It wasn't merely carved, it seemed to emanate from the stone itself, part of its very essence. And as he looked closer, the symbol began to morph, to shift. The wings seemed to ripple, the central disk to spin. The geometric lines flowed and reformed, coalescing into a complex, multi-layered image. It was the holographic star map, rendered in stone, but far more detailed, far more dynamic. And at its very center, where Nibiru pulsed, a new element appeared, a single colossal structure, unlike anything human, shimmering with an impossible light. It was a portal, an ancient gateway, a direct link between this desert mesa and the far reaches of the Anunnaki Empire. This was the true nature of the Watchers, not just observers, but guardians of a threshold, waiting for the precise alignment, for the return. The sensation of danger now became overwhelming, absolute. The air grew cold, filled with the scent of ozone and something else, something metallic and sharp like ancient blood. If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this has resonated with you. So, empower this content. Like it now, and send it to someone who needs to see this. The portal, shimmering with an impossible ethereal light within the ancient petroglyphs, was a shock to Aris's system, a punch to his very soul. It pulsed with a silent, profound energy that felt both ancient and impossibly advanced, a gateway woven into the fabric of the desert itself. The hum of the ether scanner was now a continuous, high-pitched scream, confirming the immense power emanating from the monolith. The air around him grew colder, denser, filled with the metallic scent of ozone and something else. Something that smelled like distant stars and forgotten time. His breath plumed in the frigid air, even as the desert night remained warm. He reached out a trembling hand, drawn by an irresistible force, by a curiosity that transcended fear. The stone felt cold beneath his fingertips, yet vibrated with an intense, unseen energy. The holographic projection of the star map and the portal pulsed, inviting him, daring him, to step through. He felt a profound sense of emotional overwhelm, a mixture of abject terror, exhilarating wonder, and a deep, shattering despair. This was it. This was the truth he had spent his life chasing, far grander and far more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. His mind raced, a whirlwind of fragmented thoughts and images. The Sumerian tablets, the Nazca lines, the classified reports, the messages from his team, Professor Finch's veiled words, his childhood dreams of shimmering figures, all coalesced into a single, cohesive, horrifying narrative. This wasn't just a portal. It was a nexus, a point of convergence for millennia of Anunnaki influence, a bridge between worlds. He remembered a line from one of the apocryphal Gnostic texts he'd studied years ago, a cryptic passage about archons who created a false reality, keeping humanity trapped in ignorance. He'd dismissed it as mystical metaphor. Now it felt like a chillingly accurate description of humanity's manipulated existence. The Anunnaki weren't just gods, they were architects of perception, engineers of reality, orchestrating a grand illusion. A sudden, sharp crack echoed through the desert like thunder, but without the accompanying flash of lightning. It emanated not from the sky, but from the monolith itself. A thin fissure, glowing with the same ethereal light as the portal, snaked across the stone face, extending from the winged disc symbol. The ground beneath Aris's feet trembled violently, sending vibrations up his legs, threatening to throw him off balance. Small stones dislodged from the monolith, tumbling down, clattering at his feet. He stumbled back, fear finally overpowering curiosity, his mind screaming at him to flee. But his feet felt rooted to the spot, held captive by an invisible force, by a sense of inevitability. The portal intensified, its light growing brighter, expanding, sucking in the ambient darkness. He could now see subtle shifts within the light, indistinct shapes swirling, hints of forms that defied earthly geometry. It was like looking into a kaleidoscope of cosmic possibility, a window into another dimension. A deep, resonant hum began to emanate from the portal, a sound that vibrated not just in the air, but directly within his chest cavity, his very bones. It was a frequency that bypassed his ears, an ancient song, a call. And within the hum, he heard voices. Not distinct words, but a cacophony of ancient whispers, echoes of commands, fragments of conversations, all speaking in a language both alien and strangely familiar. It was the sound of millennia, compressed into a single overwhelming moment. It was the voices of the Anunnaki themselves, their presence asserting itself. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block out the overwhelming sensory assault. But the images, the sounds, the feeling of profound power were seared into his mind. This was a moment of true, unadulterated shock, a fourth emotional explosion that tore through the very fabric of his being. A voice, ancient and resonant, yet undeniably internal, whispered his name again, Aris. But this time, it was accompanied by a vision, a fleeting, impossibly vivid image of a colossal crystalline city, shimmering under a reddish-orange sky, its architecture impossibly intricate, its towers reaching into a dense alien atmosphere. And at the heart of the city, a single immense structure, a spiraling tower of light, emanating the very same winged disc symbol. It was Nibiru. He was seeing it, not through a telescope, not through ancient texts, but through a direct psychic link established by the portal. This wasn't just a planet, it was a living artifact, a monument to an ancient civilization, a technological marvel beyond human comprehension. The vision was overwhelming, tearing the line between the real and the impossible, between scientific observation and direct cosmic encounter. It prepared the way for the Virada 4. Aris now had access to a devastating, undeniable truth. He was seeing what was truly hidden, not just an ancient god, but an entire ancient civilization, its living planet, its technology, its portal. It was a fragment of the past extraterrestrial, actively reasserting itself. The images swirled, the voices intensified, and then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the vision receded. The portal still glowed, but the overwhelming sense of direct contact lessened. Aris opened his eyes, gasping for air, his body soaked in sweat, shivering violently despite the desert warmth. He collapsed to his knees, his muscles weak, his mind reeling from the sheer magnitude of what he had just witnessed. He had seen Nibiru, he had heard the Anunnaki, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that this was just the beginning. The ultimate revelation, the full scope of their plan, was still beyond this threshold, waiting within the shimmering gateway. Aris lay sprawled on the cold desert earth, gasping for breath, the echoes of the Anunnaki voices and the vivid image of Nibiru's crystalline city still burning in his mind. His body felt heavy, bruised by the sheer force of the revelation. The portal in the monolith pulsed steadily, a silent cosmic heartbeat inviting him forward, daring him to cross the threshold. The ether scanner, lying discarded beside him, still emitted its high-pitched whine, a testament to the immense unnatural energy radiating from the ancient stone. The air, heavy with the scent of ozone and unknown cosmic elements, seemed to thicken with each passing moment, making it difficult to draw a full breath. His mind raced, trying to process the impossible. He had seen their homeworld. He had felt their presence. The Anunnaki weren't merely figures of myth, they were real, immensely powerful, and deeply intertwined with humanity's very existence. The shock, the wonder, the absolute terror, it was an overwhelming cocktail of emotions that threatened to shatter his sanity. He thought of all the years he had spent as an outcast, ridiculed for his fanciful theories. Now he knew he wasn't wrong. He was merely ahead of his time, destined to discover a truth too grand, too dangerous for the modern world to accept. He pushed himself up, his muscles screaming in protest, and stumbled towards the portal, drawn by an irresistible pull. He knew with a chilling certainty that he had to go through, not out of reckless courage, but out of a profound, inescapable need for understanding, for the full, unvarnished truth. His entire life had been a prelude to this moment. Every piece of data, every ancient text, every suppressed memory leading him to this precipice. As he got closer, the portal's light intensified, bathing the ancient monoliths in a kaleidoscopic glow. The distinct sound of flowing water, clear and melodious, seemed to emanate from within the shimmering light, a stark contrast to the harsh desert landscape. He smelled something sweet, like exotic blossoms, mixed with the faint metallic tang that had permeated the dome. It was the scent of Nibiru, carried through the gateway, a breath of another world. He reached the edge of the portal, his hand hovering over the shimmering surface. It felt like touching cool, flowing liquid, yet offered no resistance. He could feel the faint, rhythmic pulse beneath his palm, like a heartbeat, but one that beat to a cosmic rhythm. He looked back at his dome, a tiny speck of light in the vast, indifferent desert, a symbol of his solitary quest. He thought of Lena, Ben, and Clara, his small band of truth-seekers. Would they understand? Would they believe? Would they follow? He knew he couldn't wait. The moment was now. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Aris stepped into the light. The sensation was disorienting, a dizzying whirl of colors, sounds, and impossible energies. It felt like being simultaneously torn apart and reassembled, every atom of his being stretched and compressed across vast distances. He heard a chorus of whispers, clearer now, distinct voices speaking in the ancient tongue he had only glimpsed in cuneiform. They were welcoming him, guiding him, drawing him deeper into the unknown. And then, just as suddenly, the chaos subsided. He stood not in a desolate desert, but in a vast, ethereal chamber. The air was cool, impossibly clean, and filled with the scent of blooming alien flora. Above him, a vaulted ceiling of living crystal pulsed with soft internal light, illuminating walls adorned with intricate carvings that mirrored the symbols he'd found on his telescope and the metallic cylinder. The floor beneath his feet was smooth, cool to the touch, and seemed to ripple with faint internal energy. He was on Nibiru, or at least a part of it, a gateway outpost. Before him, stretching into the impossibly bright distance, was a colossal, spiraling ramp made of the same living crystal, leading upwards towards a central, towering structure that pierced the alien sky. He could hear a low hum, a resonant frequency that seemed to power the entire chamber, giving it life. He felt an overwhelming sense of awe, mixed with a chilling realization. This wasn't just a place, it was a testament, a grand, silent declaration of power and purpose. He looked around, trying to comprehend the sheer scale, the alien elegance of his surroundings, and then he saw them. Figures, tall, slender, yet powerfully built, moving with an effortless grace. Their skin was a pale, almost translucent blue, their eyes large and luminous, radiating an inner light. They wore garments of shimmering fabric that seemed to shift color with their movements. They were the Anunnaki, living, breathing, walking before him. They weren't gods in the traditional sense, but beings of immense biological and technological sophistication, beings who had mastered the very fabric of existence. One of them, taller than the rest, with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of eons, turned towards him. Its face was serene, devoid of human emotion, yet conveyed an undeniable sense of authority. It didn't speak with its mouth, but its voice resonated directly in Aris's mind, clear as a bell, precise as a laser. "Welcome, Aris Thorn. You have found your way." As predicted, this was the final, overwhelming explosion of emotion, the ultimate shattering realization. A gesture unexpected, a decision that went against logic, something Aris did without fully understanding why. He had followed the call, stepped through the portal, and now stood face to face with the architects of humanity. This explosion led to the Virada 5, 100%, the ultimate denouement. If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this has resonated with you. So, empower this content. Like it now, and send it to someone who needs to see this. The Anunnaki's voice resonated directly in Aris's mind, a cosmic whisper that bypassed the need for spoken words. "Welcome, Aris Thorn. You have found your way, as predicted." The chilling clarity of its thought, the calm assurance of its tone, brought Aris to a profound, devastating realization. His entire journey, his seemingly rebellious quest for truth, had been meticulously observed, perhaps even engineered. He was not a lone explorer stumbling upon a hidden path. He was a carefully selected participant in a grand, ancient plan. The air in the crystalline chamber, though pure and sweet, felt heavy with the weight of this cosmic manipulation, the silence echoing with the unspoken truths of millennia. He stood transfixed, staring at the towering Anunnaki before him, their luminous eyes holding the silent story of creation and control. He was a small, insignificant human, confronted by beings who had shaped civilizations, altered genetics, and orchestrated the very timeline of human existence. The portal behind him shimmered faintly, a quiet reminder of the desert he had left, a world he now understood to be merely a stage set, carefully curated. The Anunnaki's thoughts flowed into his mind again, a torrent of ancient knowledge, bypassing language, directly imprinting concepts and images. He saw the genesis of humanity, not a random evolutionary accident, but a deliberate genetic modification, a species engineered from primordial hominids, infused with Anunnaki DNA, specifically designed for mining operations on Earth, for resource extraction. He saw the golden mines, the enslaved populace, the vast cities built in Mesopotamia, the knowledge bestowed upon primitive humans, not as benevolence, but as tools for efficiency. He witnessed the Great Retreat, not as an exodus born of conflict, but a strategic withdrawal. Nibiru, with its immense eccentric orbit, was leaving Earth's immediate vicinity. The Anunnaki had left behind the Watchers, a silent, pervasive network of influence, carefully placed artifacts, and subtle genetic predispositions within humanity, ensuring the species would evolve along a preordained path, always drawn to the stars, always seeking the gods who had created them. They seeded myths, crafted religions, and manipulated historical narratives, all to preserve the truth of their lineage, while keeping humanity subservient, ignorant of its true purpose. He saw the star of crossing, Nibiru, returning now, its long orbital cycle nearing completion. The gravitational anomalies, the energy signatures Ben had detected, were not a fleet, but the awakening of dormant technology, the preparation for a new phase of engagement. The portal he had stepped through was not just a gateway, it was a reactivation point, a direct bridge to a civilization ready to reassert its influence. Humanity, they believed, was now ripe for a new level of guidance, ready to embrace its destiny as a tool, as a cultivated resource. The revelation was not given as a response, but as an overwhelming impact, something that changed everything. Aris felt a profound sense of loss, a cosmic grief. The romantic notion of human self-determination, of free will, shattered around him. Every war, every scientific breakthrough, every artistic masterpiece, every yearning for the divine, was it all part of their plan, a carefully managed experiment? The Anunnaki's eyes, devoid of judgment or malice, simply observed, as a farmer might observe a thriving crop. The Anunnaki's final thought imprinted itself on his mind, clear and cold. You are the bridge, Aris Thorn, the first to fully see. The choice of how humanity receives this truth, the choice of its ultimate path, now rests upon your understanding. It was a heavy burden, a crushing responsibility. He had not merely uncovered a secret, he had become its vessel, its herald. He looked back towards the shimmering portal, its ethereal light a stark contrast to the vast alien chamber. He had glimpsed the complete truth, an ancestral secret about the Anunnaki, about human origin, about their return, about the manipulation of history, and about civilization's final destiny. He now held the exposed timeline, laid bare before him. The narrator never answers completely. He leaves the last phrase as a mark in the public's mind, something that echoes and invites reflection. The sense of dread and awe mingled, leaving Aris with a chilling certainty. The hum of the crystalline chamber began to subtly shift, a change in frequency that resonated with the portal behind him. The Anunnaki turned, their movements fluid, silent, beckoning him towards the colossal spiraling ramp. His journey was far from over. The real challenge, he knew, was not just in seeing the truth, but in facing its consequences. He was not just an astrophysicist anymore. He was a messenger, standing at the crossroads of human and alien history, burdened with a truth that could either liberate or destroy. The world he knew was gone, replaced by a universe far vaster, far older, and infinitely more complex than any human had ever dared to dream. And the question remained, echoing in the vast silent chamber: what would he do with it? If this content ripped open your mind, comment below. I saw what he saw. That helps me understand who's truly seeking knowledge beyond the surface. Like the video, subscribe to the channel now, and hit that notification bell, because the next episodes are going even deeper. And don't leave without clicking the next video. It's the continuation of this journey.